Hello and welcome to the fourth edition of Cardinal Dash. I am King Jemison alongside your resident biology major, Daniel Martinez-Krams, and we are here to discuss a little bit of worry tonight. And you know what? That's just what you needed in this COVID-19 era is more worry. But as a Stanford football fan, there is plenty to chew on and plenty to worry about with the news of these past couple weeks. So we took last week off for Labor Day. We got a lot to cover this week, and so let's dive right in. Walker Little, Stanford's star senior left tackle, decided to opt out of the season to prepare for the 2021 NFL Draft, where he's a potential first-round pick. We'll talk about his draft potential in this show and in future shows. But first of all, Daniel, what does Little's departure mean for Stanford's season, whether that be in the late fall or next spring?
It's not doomed. It's not doomed by any means, and I can't stress that enough. Walker Little is immensely talented. He will go in the first round of the next NFL draft, whenever that is. But Stanford has replacements. He missed nearly all of last year, and Stanford fans know that. He went down in the season opener against Northwestern, and then missed the rest of the season. And who stepped in? Walter Rouse. Walter Rouse played excellent for the rest of the season, especially for a freshman. He was raw. No one expected him to be there. Everyone thought that he'd have a year behind Little to mature. But no, this guy who's 6'6" and very smart. He went to Tasha Obama. This is a very smart guy. That's who you want playing left tackle. He became just the second left tackle since 2000 to start true freshman for Stanford. The guy in front of him who did that was Walker Little. Walker Little went down. He stepped in. I'm not worried about it going forward. This guy's talented. And you know what? He's coming in and he's going to compete with Miles Hinton. So now Stanford has depth, something they haven't had at the offensive line for quite some time, for at least 2 years, where they've been really decimated along the line. And now there's depth. There's going to be a lot of competition. And I'm looking forward to what we're going to see out of this year from the offensive line.
I don't disagree with you that it's not doomed, but I don't think I agree with the example that last season is an example of why it's not doomed, because Walker Little went down at the start of last season, and Stanford went 4-8. And I'm not saying Walker Little alone improved that record, but the offensive line was absolutely hammered throughout the season with depth. Those true freshmen came in and played very well, but it's not like offensive line was a strength for Stanford at all. And a lot of that had to do with the star being out for so long. And Walker Little is a guy who, you know, regardless of his injury history, was an NFL talent, and Stanford doesn't have enough NFL talent on the roster. So I definitely think it's a major blow. You're going from playing a consensus 5-star guy like Walker Little to, albeit a very underrated 3-star, but still a 3-star in Walter Rouse, who had a fantastic true freshman season. But it's just another example of where Stanford is falling off a little bit talent-wise. I mean, the top 2 NFL players in this year's Stanford team are obviously Walker Little and Paulson Adebo. Walker Little's out. Paulson Adebo, we'll see what he decides to do. But you take that away, and there's not a whole lot of surefire NFL talent on this roster. And, you know, that just doesn't bode well when you're playing in a power conference, although I'm not even sure we can still consider the Pac-12 a power conference.
Whoa. We're really throwing things out here. I don't know about that at all. Pac-12, still very much Power 5. But beyond that, I do want to give one caveat, which is that if Walker Little's departure does start a wave, then we're in for some worry if we see Paulson and Adebo go. But I don't think that's going to happen either. Adebo has so much to prove. Draft evaluators were so high on him after 2018, and then he had his 2019. Completely regressed. No one really saw it coming, but once it happened, people were like really taking steps back, because now he's not a surefire first-round guy. I think he may be the second day, maybe even third day, especially if he has another season like 2019. So I think Paulson Adebo has to come back. That's one thing. And then you can't blame last year's struggles on the offensive line. There was so much else going on way beyond that. And it's really ludicrous to say it happened because Walker Little went down in the first game. So many things had to go wrong after that. You can't put that on him or on anyone else, really. Last year's struggles were the entire program wide, and trying to put it all on Walker Little and saying that they're going to go 4-8 again because he's out. Come on.
Daniel, don't put words in my mouth. I'm not saying that they went 4-8 because of Walker Little, and I'm not saying they're going to go 4-6 this year because he's going to be out again. But I am just saying that this is a major blow, that you are finally looking at a team with offensive line depth after a couple seasons where the offensive line situation has been so tenuous. And now, although it's for very good reasons, and I think it's probably for the best for Walker Little's NFL future, it's basically like having a season-ending injury before you even get the games underway. I mean, that's effectively what an opt-out is. A guy you expected to be on your roster is now no longer on your roster. And especially a player who might have been the linchpin of your offense. When you're really looking at it, you're looking at a very unproven, although very talented quarterback. I mean, Blindside makes the argument left tackle is the most important position in football. Walker Little is playing that position, and I just wonder what it's going to be with a guy with a lot of experience for a true sophomore in Walter Rouse, but he's now going to be joined by a bunch of young guys once again and not a lot of proven talent. But we've talked a lot about what this will mean for Stanford. Let's talk about what it means for Walker Little. Where do you see him going in this upcoming 2021 draft?
Oh, he's absolutely a first rounder, especially at left tackle. I think we've everyone, draft evaluators, what we've seen from his time, especially in 2018, 2017, absolutely a first-round talent. It's going to be a deep class, it looks like, at left tackle, but I think he's still a first-round guy. And I do want to go back to a few things because Stanford is a team that has prepared guys for the NFL, right? Sports Pac-12, our new friend, 35 guys from Stanford on NFL rosters. They just tweeted that out today. This is a program that has put so many people in the Pac-12. That's second just behind Washington in the Pac-12. So Stanford knows what it's doing. It's a program that has a lot going on. Come on. And then, what was the other thing? Just, King, come on. Come on now.
Come on what? I'm just saying that a guy you say is a consensus first round
but they
talent.
never expected to have him back. It was such a lift. It was such a lift for him to come back because he wasn't supposed to be here for his senior year. He was supposed to leave after 3 years. That's why it was such a lift back in December when he said he was coming back. Because we're like, whoa, this is really going to do so much for us. It's going to add to the depth. But now it's not really like a season-ending injury because we never expected him to come back. He came back. It was great. Oh, wait, now there's a pandemic. There's no games. There's so much other talent. I just told you, Miles Hinton is expected to compete at left tackle with Walter Rouse, who started there for 11 games like last year. That's depth. We don't need 3 guys at one position. 2 is, for Stanford's offensive line, plenty of depth. That's more than we've seen in a long time, where last year Tucker Fisk was taking reps, a tight end. So just having 10 guys who could possibly play offensive line, such an improvement. I'm honestly very grateful, very happy for the time that Walker Little spent at Stanford. I really look forward to seeing what he does in the league because time after time we've seen Stanford guys excel. And I think this is another guy that's going to do like that again because he's probably the best recruit that David Shaw has ever had. He was ranked 7th in his class, and now he's going to do big things again. Proud of him.
And he obviously lived up to the hype as a freshman. He was the Pac-12 Offensive Freshman of the Year, co-offensive Freshman of the Year, I believe, with J.J. Taylor from Arizona. He lived up to the hype. It's just a shame that he missed so much of his career with injuries. I would have loved to see him out on the field more. But I think given that injury history, it's just a good decision to go ahead and take that money and run. And also, we don't even quite know what the Pac-12 is going to do this season. Is there going to be a season? How long are you going to have to wait? And with other conferences playing, that NFL draft is likely to stay in its usual April slot. So I think it only makes so much sense for a guy like that, and we wish him all the best. I think that you're right, that if he can show off in the combine and in workouts, and particularly show off in medicals that he is capable of completing a season injury-free, this guy's a first-rounder. And if he doesn't go in the first round, whoever picks him up later than that is going to get an absolute steal because we know this guy is a mauler at left tackle. But, Daniel, there is still hopefully going to be a season played in the spring with or without Walker Little. We now know it's without. But the rest of college football seems to be moving on without the Pac-12. We're looking at a situation where 3 power conferences have either begun their season or are set to begin their season within the next couple weeks. The Big Ten is voting on a return to play this week. They could come back as early as mid-October. Meanwhile, the Pac-12 still sitting on the sidelines, no clear plan for the future. how should Stanford fans and Pac-12 fans generally feel about the start of this college football season?
Well, to start off, there is somewhat of a plan. Pac-12 was the first conference to really announce a partnership, and I think that's really promising. But seeing all the other games around college football honestly makes me disappointed and a little bit concerned, because the bubble is the only system that can work, and college football is not operating in a bubble. College football is putting communities at undue risk, and it's honestly dangerous. Last week, Dr. Leroy Sims, who is the vice president and medical director of the NBA, gave a talk on Zoom over at Stanford, right? This is the person who set up the bubble. What he said in that talk is that you need a bubble. He talked about how one of the primary concerns for the NBA when they set up their season in the bubble in Orlando was how are they going to affect communities? And what they did first is in teams' home markets, they made sure each team was giving out testing. And then when they went to Orlando, they made sure the same thing. They weren't going to be a burden on the community. Now, when we have football in South Bend, Indiana, there's problems. There's going to be a lot of testing issues. There's going to be a lot of outbreaks, all because we decided college football is so important that we're going to prioritize it over the health of communities. I think that's the wrong call. And if I'm a student, if I'm a recruit looking around, I'm going to look to the conference that has a moral compass. Is it disappointing that Stanford and the rest of the Pac-12 isn't playing? Sure. But if I'm going to look around, I want a conference that's going to support me and is going to look out for interest beyond money. And that's why I think Stanford and the Pac-12 are making the right call by talking to doctors.
Daniel, I'm going to address that on 2 points. One, the medical point. Second, the football point. On the medical point, you're obviously right. There's been 88,000 cases on college campuses. That is a lot. Now, college students are not really the ones at risk. We've seen very few hospitalizations of college students. One Brown epidemiologist found in his study that out of 26,000 positive cases, there were 0 hospitalizations of college students. But what you're saying is correct. It's about the surrounding communities. And even if the football team is having to isolate, the general student body is not isolating from the surrounding community. They're contributing to major spreads in a lot of these schools that have gone back to campus in a somewhat normal capacity, including playing college sports like college football. So I agree with you that it's very difficult to say that it's a good thing that college football is playing when we're in the middle of a pandemic, and it is clearly not helping the situation. But from a football side of things, I wish all recruits were as high-minded as you, our wonderful biology major who likes to talk to doctors, probably going to be a doctor himself one day. But I don't think that's what everybody's thinking about. I think people are thinking about how can I get on the field? How can I get myself noticed? How can I get myself the NFL? And you said it earlier, Stanford gets guys to the NFL, and I completely agree with that. It is something that David Shaw has done exceptionally well. That may be the greatest thing about the David Shaw era. But right now, those guys aren't getting the exposure they need. And a guy like Walker Little, who is probably going to be your highest pick anyway, he decided to opt out because who knows what's coming in the spring. And to go further on the football point, if the Big Ten and Pac-12 were linked, I thought that it was all good because you got a Rose Bowl potential. And maybe a few more bowl games below that, like the teams 2 through 6 in each conference faced off in bowl games. You could have something of a normal season. But when you're looking at the Pac-12 being potentially the only power conference to try to play in 2021, my guess is they decide not to play at all. Or it is a significantly different season that's effectively nothing more than like the NFL preseason. And that is a huge bummer. And it does make me think that given the testing capabilities that the Pac-12 has recently announced, maybe they could have waited. Maybe they could have waited to see if the technology could catch up with their aspirations, as it did just shortly after they made that announcement. And if they had waited, perhaps we're seeing college football in the Pac-12. That being said, I think the biggest obstacle is state and local restrictions in California and Oregon that are effectively shutting these teams down regardless of what their campus leaders might want to do.
Yeah, no Pac-12 team currently in those 2 states would be able to have a season or any sort of practicing going on. So maybe they could have waited, but what is waiting really going to get them? We've talked about this before. And yes, disappointing. I'm sure every recruit wants to be out on the field. And I think to some extent it's going to hurt that they don't get to see the Stanford brand represented on the field and they don't get to see it live. but they weren't going to be able to come visit campus. They weren't going to be able to be on the sidelines. It was going to be different anyways. And now Stanford has its coaches who have a lot more time to recruit face-to-face over Zoom, rather. But to be able to establish those conversations with recruits, there's other stuff going on. Sure, there's going to be a lot of things that they're hurt in, but I don't think we could step aside and put aside the moral aspects of it just because of football, right? There's so much more that's going on. Yeah, that's where I'm at right now. Disappointed. I would love to be seeing Stanford football. I would love to be seeing all of the fall sports right now, but I don't know how we could have done it. I really don't see it at all.
I agree that it's hard to see how you can do it, particularly if you're saying how we can do it safely. But there were 20 FBS games played this past weekend, and we're going to be looking at even more than that this weekend. I mean, we got college game day going around the country. The SEC is coming back on September 26th, and it's going to feel like a normal fall again, at least watching on TV. These schools are having fans at games. There's just a very different approach to this virus, which obviously has been incredibly polarizing. Even though it's a scientific fact, it turns into a political phenomena. And so we've seen, obviously, different approaches across the country, and that's playing out in the college football era as well, or in the college football arena as well. But I just got to say, it really is a shame that we are seeing other teams play while the Pac-12 is sitting out, if only because I feel like these players, they have to be hurting right now because they were doing things right on their end. They were controlling the spread. They were making significant sacrifices in their own life to make a season possible. They were isolating with their team. They weren't going out. For a while, they weren't even seeing each other. And then they had that season robbed from them, and it doesn't look like they're going to get it back anytime soon. And now they got to watch everybody else play on TV. And it just reminds me of how fragmented a structure college sports really is, and how there is no central leadership. And had there been central leadership, this would not be happening. We wouldn't have 3 of the Power 5 conferences playing while the other 2 wait, or eventually 4 and then 1 waits. I mean, it is just showing that the NCAA system is broken. We need a new system to replace it, and it's probably going to be with the Power 5 coalescing, probably adding a few teams along the way, and providing their own leadership apart from the other schools that frankly just don't have the same financial incentives as the big guys.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I just want to address something in the chat. Someone's asking if USC is off the table for recruits knowing their moral compass. And I can't speak to anything going on at USC, but I can talk to Stanford's moral compass. And what we saw today is that Corey Booker, a Stanford alum, together with David Shaw, who's the head coach at Stanford, had a conversation about racial and social justice. So I think we know where David Shaw stands on these issues and his support for his student athletes, and his recruits know where to look on that. And then former USC head coach Pete Carroll was also on that call. So I guess that's how we can get USC in this conversation for those in the chat. But beyond that, David Shaw also talked about how his players expressed gratitude about the decision being made to postpone the season because they knew what it meant. They knew what it meant for their families, for other people around the country. They didn't want to be in limbo, not sure if there was going to be a season played. So I think Stanford gets it. I think the people that Coach Shaw wants get it. And I've heard him talking about recruiting the other day and how when he goes, he doesn't just go and talk to a football coach. He'll go and he'll talk to the counselors and the teachers, and he expects them to know who he's coming to look for when he comes in with Stanford on his chest, because he expects that the type of athlete and the type of person, the type of leader that would be at a school would be someone who's interested in Stanford, and that's the same type of person who understands the moral issues at play here.
That's all great. I want to address Luke's other question as well. Why didn't Stanford just dip into that multi-billion-dollar endowment and get this thing done? We talked a lot about that with the situation with Stanford cutting 11 sports, how much of a shame that was, how much of an absolute farce Stanford athletics messaging has been based on that decision. But the endowment just seems to be something that's totally separate from athletics. And moreover, it seems like Stanford's vision as a university does not necessarily include athletics as a huge part of this university's message to the world. And I do think that is partially seen in the Pac-12 decision to not play while other conferences are playing. And medically, like I said, it makes sense. But when you just look at it from a sports point of view, it's hard to isolate sports, but let's try to do it for 1 second. You see that other places in the country, sports is more important than about anything else, and thus sports are being played. And if you're a recruit looking to come to the Pac-12, you're seeing a conference that is going to be sitting on the sidelines because they weren't willing to dip into that endowment. They weren't willing to take those risks, even if they were bad risks to take. And yeah, so the way I see it, there's no winners in this situation. The conferences that are playing are putting their communities at risk. The conferences that aren't playing are losing a season and perhaps losing their standing amongst the power conferences for a long time to come. But this has been a bit of a depressing show so far. We had to talk about Walker Little opting out. We had to talk about other schools playing while Stanford sits out. So we wanted to end this show on a little bit of a higher note, talking about some of the best Stanford non-conference games of the past decade. I mean, this would be the non-conference season in a normal college football season. We've seen some non-conference games in other conferences, but Stanford, regardless of what happens this year, won't play a single non-conference game. So it'll be an all Pac-12 schedule, maybe a bowl game waiting at the end. So we want to talk about what we've lost, and maybe it'll be cathartic for us and help us not feel so bad about this season. So Daniel, I'm going to let you begin. Give me your top 3 best Stanford non-conference games of the past decade.
I'll start with my top. November 26, 2011. Number 4, Stanford. Number 22, Notre Dame. Stanford comes out on that one, 28-14, in the final game of Andrew Luck's home career in the Stanford Cardinal uniform. He ends his career as the all-time touchdown passing leader, had 4 touchdowns that game, 233 yards, which was a lot back in the day when he was passing for the Cardinal. Great win all around. Then the year before that, September 25th, 2010, this time in South Bend, Stanford wins to go 4-0 to start the season. Their first win in Indiana at South Bend since 1992. They win despite some luck interceptions. They would lose the next week to Oregon, but then go on to win out for the rest of the year. And then my most recent, and you'll notice a little bit of a theme here, but number 20 Stanford over number 9 Notre Dame in 2017. Notre Dame was winning that game heading into the fourth quarter, then Stanford blew it open, won by 38-20. I love watching Notre Dame lose, but it comes at the hands of Stanford. A little bit better, a little bit sweeter. Those are my top three non-conference games in the past decade.
That reminds me, you know what the worst part about other schools playing while the Pac-12 sits out is? We're seeing Notre Dame on the field. Notre Dame has got this huge national spotlight. They got NBC pumping them up every weekend. They're playing a bunch of trash ACC teams. It's going to be rough when Notre Dame finishes 9-1 with the only loss to Clemson, and Stanford doesn't get a chance to go into South Bend and mess up another Irish season. But, you know, you'll see a little bit of overlap in our list. So when I was putting this together, I realized that I got some recency bias because I grew up in Tennessee. I didn't know that Stanford existed. I thought it was that school in Birmingham called Stanford. But then I found out that there's this great place out west, and I decided that's where I wanted to go to school. But I really didn't start paying attention too much until Stanford football, beyond like Andrew Luck and Toby Gerhart and the parts that everybody knew, until the second half of this decade. So you will definitely see a significant sway to that side. Daniel, you are our Cardinal historian, so I'm glad you added some older games back in the glory days, and I can help fans remember some of the few bright spots of our more recent years. So coming at number 3, I have to place a bit of a dark horse here. 2018 opener, Stanford 31, San Diego State 10. And that game was so cathartic because if you remember the year before, Stanford went down to San Diego State with Keller Chris starting at quarterback and played like absolute trash, lose in pretty boring fashion, honestly. If you're going to lose, at least make it exciting. And then the next year they got to open it up with San Diego State. With KJ Costello at quarterback, Bryce Love coming back, we were more confident, but it didn't necessarily start off so well. But then Stanford's offense found its rhythm not with Bryce Love on the ground, but with J.J. Arcega-Whiteside through the air. He had 226 yards and 3 touchdowns in that game, went absolute beast mode, catching balls over everyone, and showed us what Stanford's offense would look like that season ultimately, which was a pass-heavy offense. And honestly, didn't always work, but it was a lot of fun to watch that KJ to JJ's connection. Then number 2, this one might have shown up on your list, so, not quite as original as I want. But 2017, Stanford 38, Notre Dame 20, in what was one of the wildest fourth-quarter sequences I've ever seen. And so this was my first year on the farm. That was one of my first games in the press box. I was hyped up. I was trying not to cheer. That's a very difficult thing to do, folks, if you've never had to sit in the press box and watch your team get a big win and not be able to do any of the hooting and hollering you want to do. But that game, once again, was not going great through 3 quarters. Stanford was in it, but they were trailing. And then all of a sudden, they exploded. 3 touchdowns in a less than 4-minute period. It was insane. KJ Casello didn't have a lot of yards, but had 4 touchdowns. Bryce Love runs for 125 yards on a completely bum ankle. I mean, he was limping on the sidelines, could barely put weight on it, but somehow he gets in the game and he can freaking fly. I love that guy, and I'm really hoping we start to see him get some more carries for the Washington football team. And that was really the peak of the 2017 Cardinal season. At that point, they were 9-3, sneaking into the top 15 in the country. Then they blow it against USC in the Pac-12 championship game and keep me from going to the Rose Bowl. I am still bitter about that. I'm not going to lie. I will hate USC for life, and that game will haunt me for life. And then number 1, this one is pretty obvious. November 2015, Stanford 38, Notre Dame 36. The Conrad Ukapina game. He hits the game-winning field goal as time expires. Stanford keeps Notre Dame out of the playoff. That honestly might have been the best part. They get Christian McCaffrey in the spotlight in primetime. I have East Coast bias, particularly back then. There was SEC football on. I was watching the Pac-12 because that was a legit good game. And that was really maybe one of the heights of Stanford's most recent decade, right in the middle. And it led to the Cardinal getting to the Pac-12 championship, getting to the Rose Bowl, finishing number 3 in the country. And then a few months later, I showed up on campus and everything collapsed. So you can blame me if you want. But that was fun to do a little bit of reminiscing about what we are losing this season with non-conference games. But Daniel, real quick before we get out of here, what do you think about Stanford's general non-conference scheduling philosophy?
Up and down. I think we saw a really impressive non-conference slate last year. There is your favorite fan base, UCF, in there, Northwestern, and then Notre Dame. So we have that Notre Dame game every year, which is pretty consistently a solid game. But then the other one's a little bit off, right? I went through the past 10 years. I've seen San Jose State 3 times, Duke, Army, UC Davis, Northwestern, UCF, and Rice all 2 times, and then Sac State, Wake Forest, and Kansas State once. A little bit weird, to be honest. I'm not sure what their philosophy is. It seems like they're going upper tier in some ways, but mostly lower tier, trying to get easy wins. And we look towards the future, all the way out until 2035 when they're going to be playing BYU. They have it, but it's a lot of the same level teams. Besides Notre Dame, there's Boston College, Kansas State, Vanderbilt. Not elite teams, not games that are going to help you in a national resume. That's really relying on their Pac-12 games and Pac-12 wins, because this isn't necessarily a team that's shooting for the CFP playoff. They're just not. That's not where their goal is year in and year out. They have the talent some years, but that's not where they're consistently shooting for. So they're hoping for a good record, get into a New Year's Six Bowl, and this is the type of non-conference schedule that helps you get there. So overall, makes some sense.
All right, whoever in the chat is talking about the Ink Bowl, we're going to block you. You're not welcome here anymore. That is too much pain right now. We're going through a pandemic, guys. We don't need to hear that too. But I gotta say, I wonder what's going to happen to Stanford's non-conference if Notre Dame joins the ACC, which could happen after this season. We might be looking at a situation where that game, which has been just an absolute stalwart on Stanford's schedule for so long, is going to disappear as Notre Dame has more conference obligations. But we got to wrap now. Thanks to everybody for participating in the chat and for really getting into this. This has been so much fun. And we got some good news for y'all. Dash Sports TV is not just TV anymore. We got some writing too. We started columns this week, and you can find those exclusively at sportspac12.com. You can also find those linked on our website at dashsportstv.com, along with these super cool videos if you want to watch them back again. And go out and follow at Dash Sports TV on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, anywhere where you can do the social media stuff. Oh, there's Facebook too. And go out and follow at Sports Pac-12 as well on social media. They have some fantastic content now, including the Dash Sports team across all your favorite Pac-12 teams. And you can find our columns and videos on social media as well as our website. And thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week. I'm King Jemison alongside Daniel Martinez-Krams. And we'll see you to talk about the next development in this wild world of the college football offseason.